Decryption Special is made possible through the continued support of viewers like you. Thank you. Special thanks to these Cryptic Creative Club members. Be sure to leave a rating, comment your thoughts down below, share the video, and of course subscribe so you don't miss out on all things cryptic. For those of you interested in joining Cryptic Creative Club, you can do so by becoming a channel member or by becoming a patron on Patreon. Tiers starting at $1 monthly. Enjoy the show. I do not like Sonic Frontiers. It's important for this episode of Decryption in particular, I remain as open and clear as possible. So to reiterate then elaborate, I do not like Sonic Frontiers and it's entirely for personal reasons. To clarify, I did not produce this video for the sake of arguing against Frontiers in an objective sense. Discussions of that nature are draining and dispiriting, and so I refuse to subject my platform to such discourse. Alternatively, this video will serve as a breakdown of my own perspective regarding the Sonic the Hedgehog franchise currently and going into the future. Ultimately, this is a thoughtful and well-intended critique of an ongoing creative work I hold a deep admiration for, not a hit piece. So don't be mean to me online, guys. I'm just trying to talk about Sonic. This video was intended to be a thorough review of Sonic Frontiers, but I decided against that for a pair of reasons. First, I will not dedicate substantial amounts of my time towards dissecting a game I do not enjoy. In truth, I cannot think of anything more unproductive. Second, considering I believe Frontiers to be rife with the same issues that have been rotting this series for decades, any review I were to make would repeat criticisms I've already expressed both publicly and privately. I will not repeat myself. Again, I cannot think of anything more unproductive. However, for the sake of proper argumentation, it's important you as the viewer are presented with at least my generalized opinion of Sonic Frontiers. Unfortunately, I enjoyed only a minor portion of this game. For example, I kinda like the soundtrack. There are a few standout pieces. I love Enjoy This World and Floating in the Blue. However, still, I'd consider it to be one of the weaker Sonic sound collections. I constantly find myself returning to soundtracks from games released prior, such as Generations and Unleashed, yet once my time with Frontiers was over, any desire I had to listen to its soundtrack completely dissipated. Prospectively, the overarching problem with Sonic Frontiers is its lack of refinement, that of which extends to its soundtrack. Upcoming its release, Frontiers was characterized as a melancholic adventure that tested the limits of Sonic's life philosophy. Contrarily, I describe the game as a shallow ambiance piece that fails to capitalize on any real sense of melancholy nor any other solid sense of emotion. It's nice to know, even 5 years after the release of Sonic Forces, the only aspect of the Sonic the Hedgehog franchise that remains consistent is its confused nature. Thanks, Sega. When it comes to Sonic, I can always count on you. The director of Sonic Frontiers, Morio Kishimoto, describes it as the first entry in the third generation of mainline Sonic games. This distinction is fitting considering Frontiers is built upon a new foundation for the series, named the Open Zone. It's fairly self-explanatory, but for the layman's sake, the Open Zone is a sandbox populated by platforming sequences and puzzles for Sonic to engage with as the player progresses throughout the game. In theory, I have no issue with this approach towards designing Sonic games. If you're unfamiliar with my past work concerning Sonic, I interpret him as a character rooted in freedom, and so to extend that philosophy to the series' game design is a wonderful idea. However, in execution, Kishimoto's Open Zone epitomizes the exact opposite for Sonic. There is no freedom in Sonic Frontiers because it's barely a game, and more so a glorified cutscene. Sonic the Hedgehog was introduced to the world as a platforming video game series, and so, despite whatever direction it may take in spin-offs and other media, it's important the mainline titles adhere to that. I stated Frontiers was the antithesis of freer Sonic game design because the bulk of it is automated, especially the platform platforming sequences. In Sonic games prior, flashy movement was rooted in the player's ability to string together and properly time certain inputs in accordance with whichever obstacles lied ahead of them. It was a very involved experience. In Sonic Frontiers, all that's required of the player is connecting with a rail, spring, or dash panel, to which you then get to watch the gameplay itself. How fun. To continue, issues extend past platforming and into the combat aspect of Frontiers open zone. To reiterate, Sonic the Hedgehog was introduced to the world as a platforming video game series. And so, despite whatever direction it may take in spin-offs and other media, it's important the mainline titles adhere to that. It's upsetting to see however many years later, the Sonic series is still locked in this unrelenting cycle of blind experimentation. Experimentation in itself is not the issue, considering Sonic the Hedgehog is an ongoing work. Periodically treading new ground is essential to maintaining the health of a larger series. The issue lies in the fact that since Sonic Unleashed was released in 2008, there has yet to be another Sonic title which properly builds upon its formula. Colors was primarily 2D and heavily relied upon gimmicks. Lost World was an entirely different style of platformer, and Forces actually neutered what Unleashed had established, stripping away all of its nuance. Sonic Generations is what's closest to an evolution of the boost formula, and yet still I'd regard it as a different interpretation as opposed to a refinement. Nevertheless, refinement is the path Sega needs to tread with Sonic. To clarify, I'm not insinuating the boost formula is what's right for Sonic, but rather, like the adventure formula that had come before, it's being discarded for the sake of starting something new. One of the main draws of Frontiers Open Zone is its various RPG mechanics such as skill points, a skill tree, and the aforementioned combat system. Combat in Sonic Frontiers is simple to understand and easy to pick up. Sonic has a one-button bread and butter combo which branches off into special moves, cutscenes, mapped to various input combinations. It's relatively inoffensive, but I must ask, what place does dedicated combat have in the mainline Sonic game series, given it has yet to master basic movement and its distinct style of platforming? To reiterate, Sonic the Hedgehog was introduced to the world as a platforming video game series, and so, despite whatever direction it may take in spin-offs and other media, it's important the mainline titles adhere to that. I do believe Sonic is a character in which rich and engaging combat systems could be developed for, but I would also make the argument this kind of experimentation must be reserved for spin-off titles, or at least until the main series finds its footing. Sonic's current identity issues stem from Sega's inability to develop a standard for Sonic games. With each new release comes the possibility of everything that preceded it becoming irrelevant. There is no overt reason to apply lessons learned from the development of Sonic Adventure and Sonic Adventure 2 to Sonic Unleashed because they are fundamentally different games. This series cannot be refined if it isn't allowed the chance to move far enough in a single direction. Kishimoto and the rest of Sonic team developed a system that could be unique to Sonic, but also fell within the resource constraints for this project. They did what they could, and while that's commendable, all I can think is why even set out to make this kind of game to begin with. Sonic doesn't need to be an RPG series, especially if its competition has had decades to refine their respective formulas. On that note, considering combat is the crux of these sequences, let's talk about Sonic Frontiers boss battles. I can understand why people like this, but I'm not too crazy about it. First, again, these battles are built around Frontiers' combat system, which stinks. I don't know what else to tell you guys. Second, while they are rich with spectacle, they are also poor of grandeur. Throughout the entirety of Sonic Frontiers, Super Sonic is treated as though it's just something Sonic does. In games prior, there was always this intense push for Sonic and the gang to collect the emeralds, and so once they do, and Sonic finally goes super, it's fulfilling and slightly cathartic.
Mono, hold on dude, it's definitely a struggle to collect the emeralds in Frontiers, and because of that, I'd argue Sonic's transformation into Super Sonic is just as satisfying here as it was any time before.
Okay, I hear you. But the key difference between Sonic Frontiers and almost every other instance of Super Sonic's inclusion within a mainline game is the former's format. Sonic Frontiers is a non-linear experience. Non-linearity can be beneficial to a game's design, but in terms of structure, it is detrimental to its narrative. Breath of the Wild attempted a similar style of storytelling, and the result there was the same as it is here. The narrative suffered. Super Sonic's weight, his cathartic nature, is resonant within the narrative, and that's why Frontiers' boss boss battles don't hold a candle to Super Sonic vs. Perfect Chaos, or Super Sonic and Super Shadow vs. the Final Hazard, or Super Sonic, Super Shadow, and Super Silver vs. Solaris. I don't care about the Coco, the Ancients, their stupid little toys, or this dumb rock. Frontier's story reeks, man. I didn't care for it when I first played the game, and I don't care for it now. I would break it down, but in order to do that, I'd have to understand what actually happened, which I don't, because it couldn't hold my attention. Besides, whatever worthwhile comment I could have made about this game's narrative, I probably stated just now, so whatever. Unfortunately, yet predictably, I found the remainder of Frontier's open zone as disappointing as its platforming and combat. For instance, exploration in this game is incredibly unfulfilling because there's nothing worthwhile to look for. Frontiers introduced a new species of little guys called the Koroks. I mean the Coco. They're scattered across the game's various islands and can be traded in to increase Sonic's base stats. If you want to scour obsessively to find them all, go ahead, though unlike Breath of the Wild, they aren't locked behind any clever puzzles or hidden away, but rather haphazardly placed across the map. Honestly, I'd say this goes for all of Frontier's collectibles. On the topic of puzzles, those are easily the aspect of the open zone I least appreciate. I have no interest in slowing down to dedicate time to what feels entirely arbitrary. None of the puzzles in Frontiers were unique nor tailored to Sonic, and so I'm left with this impression their inclusion was purely for the sake of populating the open zone and padding the game's completion time. Also, before anyone asks, I do consider Kronos Island's mirror puzzle to be as arbitrary as the rest. I beat it in like 30 seconds during my initial playthrough, and then again in less time on stream. If you struggled with that, get your media literacy up, bro. The open zone is the majority of Sonic Frontiers, and so it's here I feel comfortable stating I don't believe this game is any good. As a matter of fact, I enjoy the game so little I couldn't stomach playing it again for the sake of recording footage. You see that? Those are PlayStation inputs, and I own an Xbox. I paid a buddy $50 to do some frontiering for me just so I could ease my own suffering. Dude, I think this game is so cool. Could you shut up? Alright. Before I elaborate upon any conclusive statements, I'd like to discuss one final lesser component of Sonic Frontiers. Surprisingly, cyberspace was the component of Sonic Frontiers I enjoyed the most, but only because it's a collection of traditional Sonic levels. In terms of quality, cyberspace is on par with the open zone and much worse than what came before. As was the case with Sonic Forces, the moveset introduced alongside Sonic's boost mechanic has been heavily neutered. Overall, when compounding this lack of nuance with a general awkwardness of movement and level design structured around entirely different styles of play, cyberspace falls flat for me in every regard. Sure, it can be fun, but you could say the same about watching paint dry if you do it a certain way. I'd also like to express my distaste for Sega reusing old level designs and still charging full price for Sonic Frontiers. There's no instance in which this is excusable, and if anything, it's left me with the impression Sega's approach towards developing the Sonic the Hedgehog franchise is soured even further. I do not believe they are headed in the right direction. Due to the nature of the remainder of this video, I'd like to reaffirm it isn't a hit piece. My goal here is to simply express a perspective worth expressing, nothing more. Having made this discernment, Morio Kishimoto is just not doing it for me. Irrespective of their remaining components, in terms of game design, I have a fervent distaste for every Kishimoto-directed Sonic title. These games are plagued by systems and mechanics that fail to compound upon one another or actually inhibit each other. Sonic should be developed in a clear and straightforward manner, that of which I've yet to see Kishimoto accomplish. To clarify, the blame for the state of Sonic Frontiers does not rest solely on Kishimoto's shoulders. AAA game development is entirely a collaborative effort, and so I'm not willing to perpetuate this narrative that any one person is entirely responsible for the condition of the Sonic series. However, there are faults within Frontiers' larger design that originate in its foundation, that of which is largely dependent upon the game's director. Allow me to evoke my stance that Sonic's focus should be on refinement and not experimentation. It has been nearly 12 years since any improvements were made to Sonic's boost formula. In that time, Sega has shifted the series' focus to multimedia expansion in lieu of pushing the envelope of technical game design. Mono, hold on. Why does Sonic have to push the envelope of game design? I'm fine with anything so long as it's fun. I hear you, I really do. But personally, I'm disinterested in continuing to watch the immense potential of this unique creative work be squandered. Regardless of whether you enjoy Sonic Frontiers, many will agree the game would benefit from refinement. Why is this the case? Oh right, it's because it's another entirely new Sonic game formula preceding another series failure. With a new focus on the open zone, there is no overt reason to apply lessons learned from Sonic Forces to Sonic Frontiers. This is especially the case considering the bulk of Forces' problems lied in its specific interpretation of the boost formula. So there's only so much Sonic Team could directly improve upon. It's with that, I'd argue Sonic Frontiers should have been a return to form. I'm aware I'm drawing the ire of the Sonic community when I say this, but whenever I see Sonic Frontiers, all I can think is Sonic the Hedgehog, Breath of the Wild. As such, every time I play it, I'm reminded of how much more efficaciously Nintendo crafted their industry-shaping experience. For example, Breath of the Wild is built upon a framework of systems that were designed with the intention of engaging with one another in roundabout ways. So, oddly, that game also plays itself, but in a manner similar to how our planet Earth engages with itself. Conversely, Sonic Frontiers is built upon a framework of systems that are only loosely threaded together, ultimately functioning outside of one another. Effectively, what I'm trying to say is Breath of the Wild is harmonious in its design and Sonic Frontiers isn't. During my initial playthrough of the game, I could not help feeling I was simply crossing items off a list of menial tasks as opposed to playing a game, especially an open-ended one. The gameplay loop of fighting bosses to gain portal gears, using those gears to open portals to cyberspace, completing cyberspace stages to gain portal keys, using portal keys to unlock vaults that house the Chaos Emeralds, then collecting memory tokens to unlock interactions with other characters, and progress through the story got very old really quick. Alternatively, Breath of the Wild allows for a higher degree of freedom of progression, and so even though you're playing through the same game, it feels like a new adventure every playthrough. Truthfully, there is no real comparison to be made between The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild and Sonic Frontiers because the latter probably only exists for the sake of adhering to industry trends. The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild was such an impactful creative work because it was constructed from a vision. There was a genuine desire to progress the Zelda series in a particular direction, with a certain outcome in mind. I'm willing to give Sonic Team and Sega the benefit of the doubt and assume this was also the case for Sonic Frontiers, but when evaluating the product as it was released, I have a hard time believing that. The open zone formula has just as much potential for the series as the adventure formula or boost formula. However, it's important to note that because of its nature, it'd be best attempted as a project with a greater budget, longer development window, larger development team, and stronger lead. For example, Breath of the Wild was delayed time and time again for the sake of allowing the product to reach its fullest potential. Yes, Sonic Frontiers was delayed a year for the sake of quality control. However, even then it feels like that was a struggle, and the game still could have benefited from more time in development, a statement that's applicable to many Sonic releases. Furthermore, Breath of the Wild was developed by a team of about 300 people under the supervision of the heavily accomplished Hidemaru Fujibayashi. Sonic Frontiers was developed by a team of 60 people led by the director of Sonic Lost World and Sonic Forces. This game was doomed from the start, no wonder it turned out the way it did. Finally, while there aren't any public numbers for either game's budget, considering Breath of the Wild was one of Nintendo's biggest releases in recent years, we can presume it was also the costlier of the two. For its scope, Frontiers needed to be much smaller in scale to actually provide fans with a worthwhile experience after the failure of Sonic Forces. Imagine instead the game after Forces was intended to refine what Sonic had already established as to provide a true return to form for the series. The game was linear and contained in scale, possibly a solo Sonic adventure that focused on nailing 3D movement and stage design. Then, this refined formula built in accordance to adventure and boost could have served as the foundation for what would have been a truly new era of Sonic. There would be a clear and appropriate standard of development, and thus future titles would be free to experiment in more meaningful ways, resulting in a flourishing series of mainline games. Instead, it's back to square one with this new formula that falls in line with none of what Sonic's done before, hopefully not resulting in another era of uncertainty and of lacking vision. The proof is in the very nature of Sonic Frontiers. Take its logo for instance. There's no style or flair, it's just Sonic Frontiers. Gotta love it. Sonic the Hedgehog has become stagnant in its design, and that's entirely the fault of the house it was built upon. Sega has always been Sonic's problem. Recently, I was discussing with my friend Teleblue Kishimoto's position as the primary game director at Sonic Team. He remarked it's likely he's only in that position because Sega has lost so much of its talent over the years, especially when regarding Sonic Team. Sonic Team is no longer a dedicated team, but rather a namesake. The founding members responsible for the creation and initial development of Sonic the Hedgehog as a character and as a video game series have long since left Sega. It's wonderful Takashi Iizuka remains and is heavily involved in the development of the franchise, but again, AAA game development is a collaborative effort, and since he was only responsible for specific roles at any given moment, a lot of the technical understanding of Sonic possessed by other members has been lost to Sega. Sega's turnover problem even extends past Sonic Team and into its other IPs, such as the Yakuza series. Toshihiro Nagoshi, creator and ex-director of the Yakuza series, departed from the company as a result of Sega's executive branch promoting him into managerial roles as opposed to the creative, developmental ones. In his own words, "I don't want to be the CEO of Sega here. I'm a player and a game maker. I want to continue to push my career in that way." With its original talent elsewhere, no prospective talent with the potential to capitalize on Sonic, and no significant quality nor consistency control measures in practice, I have no faith in Sonic Team nor Sega to deliver a worthwhile Sonic product. Sonic's story will always be an interesting one, an icon born for the sake of competition. In his infancy, Sonic took the video games industry and world by storm, entirely fulfilling that purpose. Every aspect of this series' design, from the character's look to the world he inhabited, was conceived for the sake of showing everyone what Sega was all about. During the 2018 Game Developers Conference, Hirokazu Yasuhara and Naoto Oshima, original game designer and character designer for Sonic the Hedgehog respectively, held a panel detailing the intent behind the conception of the series. I'll leave a link to the panel in its entirety in the description below. It's filled with tons of valuable information regarding the creation of this character, and so I definitely recommend it. There are two talking points in particular I'd like to draw attention to. First, at 26 minutes and 9 seconds, Yasuhara presents anecdotes from developing Sonic the Hedgehog for the Mega Drive/Genesis, explaining how the game was intended to showcase the full technical potential of Sega's new 16-bit system. The smooth geography Sonic games became known for, visual tricks used to convey feelings of speed, and the presence of large and moving objects presented the public with an experience yet to be seen in the video game industry because nobody was doing it like Sega. Sonic the Hedgehog made his debut as a technical marvel. Sonic the Hedgehog needs to remain a technical marvel. Second, prior to this, Oshima spent time detailing the process of conceptualizing Sonic as a character. Obviously, Sonic's simple shapes and color were discussed, but the most noteworthy remarks were about Sonic's style of cool and what was ultimately hoped to be accomplished with his final design. Sonic's cool is substantive. It comes from somewhere real, and he is supposed to feel familiar, as though you've known him your whole life. What's interesting about substantive cool is that it's rooted in a defined sense of self. Sonic's discovered who he is at his core, and so he refuses to ever change nor ignore that. I'll be honest, I miss that. I miss when Sonic wasn't just a hero, or an idol, or even a good friend, but simply exactly who he is. Nothing more, nothing less. Furthermore, familiarity is intrinsic to the character, and so people should know who Sonic is. Considering this, if no one can reach a consensus on who this character is and what direction the franchise should take, then there's something wrong. Sonic was intended to be recognizable as something in particular, and as I've articulated upon before, what he is now simply isn't that. If you'd like to disagree with me, then by all means go ahead. I don't care. I'm just some random guy on the internet. But at the very least, pay attention to what Sonic's creators, the original Sonic team, have to say about their own creative work. Yasuhara and Oshima were among those who set the standard for Sonic the Hedgehog, and it's yet to be met by anyone else. This franchise is capable of so much more. I know it with every fiber of my being. I'm very happy those who hold as much love for the franchise as I do are currently enjoying it, but I haven't been satiated by it since Sonic Generations. I have spent a decade of my life waiting around for Sega to finally start taking Sonic seriously, and it is yet to happen. Thus, this is the start of a new era for me, where I will be focusing exclusively on developing my own character and his respective universe, so please stick around for that. I promise it'll be worth the trouble. I also aim to explore Sonic the Hedgehog as a creative work in my own way. It's easily my biggest creative inspiration, and although I don't appreciate how it's being handled, I will always believe in the core of this work. Wow. It's hard to think about being a Sonic fan without supporting any of the official products. It's quite the conundrum, isn't it? Don't got that fever, that Sonic fantasy fever. Don't got that fever, that Sonic fantasy fever. Hey.